Welcome to the Spirit Airlines presentation on bingo fuel. The purpose of this video is to increase our flight crew's fuel awareness and improve their ability to quickly and accurately determine whether the flight has adequate fuel to continue after encountering unforeseen circumstances like weather, delays, and holding. The overall objective is to properly manage fuel during unexpected conditions, and if holding, correctly determine an appropriate fuel and time to exit the hold. Data collected from AQP continuing qualification courses has revealed that this is an area where more guidance is necessary. The intent of this video is not to cover fuel regulations and policies. The intent of this video is to provide techniques commonly used for fuel management. Our manuals are always governing. If any information in this video differs from our manuals or any future revisions, please always comply with our manuals, Federal Aviation regulations, and Spirit Airlines policies. Let's get started and jump right in to bingo fuel. It is important to understand that bingo fuel is not a regulatory term. You will not find it in the FARs or in our FOM. You will, however, find regulatory and important information regarding fuel planning, reserve fuel, and alternate fuel in Chapter 4 and other sections of the FOM. Let's discuss the basic concept of calculating bingo fuel and some simple ways to do it. Bingo fuel is a colloquial phrase used in aviation that basically means decision fuel, or sometimes it's known as commitment fuel. It is the minimum amount of fuel required to ensure you have the required or necessary fuel at landing at your destination or alternate. Since bingo fuel is a minimum amount required or needed, upon reaching this amount, a decision must be made as to routing and destination. One common technique used to calculate bingo fuel, specifically in a hold, is to use the BAR method. This is not the only technique that may be used to ensure the flight crew lands with the required fuel. However, we will focus on the BAR technique because it aligns with the FMGC's fuel algorithms. Under the BAR method, the B stands for burn. This represents the fuel burn from a specific position or a holding fix to your destination. A, alternate fuel. Alternate fuel represents the fuel needed to get from your destination to the alternate. R, reserve, also known as final reserve. This represents the amount of fuel you want to land with at your alternate. If you add these three numbers up, you arrive at bingo fuel. In other words, the concept behind this is you're determining the minimum amount of fuel needed to leave the hold, arrive at the destination with enough fuel to still have the ability to go to the alternate and land with a reserve in the event that we cannot land at our destination, B plus A plus R. If you add these three numbers up, you have calculated bingo fuel in a hold. If you find yourself in a situation where you are holding with no alternate filed, you can still use the same formula using 0 as alternate fuel. Or, depending on why you're holding, it may be appropriate to coordinate with dispatch and add an alternate. Okay, now that we understand the concept, where do we get these three numbers from? One technique is to work backwards and begin with the R, or final reserve. On our OFP, dispatch calculates the reserve fuel needed to satisfy the regulatory requirement for our particular flight. This is shown as a term called final reserve. We will revisit the idea of final reserve later in this video, but for now, to demonstrate the BAR concept, let's use 4.0 as shown in this example as the final reserve. Let's move on to alternate fuel. How can we determine how much fuel we need to get from the destination to the alternate? As you can see, dispatch calculates alternate fuel. This amount represents the fuel needed to get from the destination to the alternate. In this case, 1.4 to get from LaGuardia to Newark. The FMGC will also calculate fuel needed to get from destination to alternate, and we will explore the FMGC fuel predict page shortly. Finally, burn. How do we calculate the fuel needed to get from the hold fix to the destination? One way to do this is by looking at the navigation log segment burn information of the OFP. Amongst other data, the OFP contains fuel and time calculations between each fix and the destination. By looking at the estimated fuel remaining at a fix where you're holding, let's say Valerie, and subtracting the estimated fuel remaining at the destination, you determine how much fuel dispatch has calculated you will burn from the hold fix to the destination. In this case, 400 pounds. Once again, the FMGC can also assist you with calculating this burn number. We will explore that more shortly. Now that we have determined our three numbers, we can add them together and determine the bingo fuel for a hold at this fix. By adding B plus A plus R, we come up with a bingo fuel of 5,800 pounds. This number represents the minimum amount of fuel needed to leave the hold, go to the destination, and arrive there with enough fuel to still make it to the alternate and arrive at the alternate with a reserve in the event that we can't get into our destination. Let's say that we enter the hold at Valerie with 7,800 pounds, and we've calculated a bingo fuel of 5,800 pounds. We know that we have 2,000 pounds of fuel to burn in the hold before we must make a decision as to whether we should continue to our destination, proceed to our alternate, or change or delete the alternate depending on the circumstances. Of course, these decisions should be made using good situational awareness and good crew resource management and threat and error management, and as always, dispatch coordination. Before we move on, let's revisit the concept of final reserve. In the BAR method, final reserve really represents how much fuel is the minimum amount you are comfortable planning to arrive at your alternate with. Dispatch calculates a final reserve number for you, but keep in mind that the FOM says that in domestic operations, the final reserve is calculated at normal cruising consumption. This 45 minutes is calculated at the highest of either flight level 320 or your last highest cruise. In the BAR method, this is where you can adjust your final reserve amount to represent the minimum amount of fuel you would like to plan on arriving at your alternate with. Here is where we use our experience and judgment to take other factors into consideration to determine the final reserve you're comfortable planning to arrive at your alternate with. These factors assess the suitability of the alternate itself. If the alternate is a single runway airport that has less than ideal weather forecasts or is prone to other unexpected circumstances, perhaps you'd be comfortable planning to have more than that final reserve number upon arriving at your alternate. Conversely, if the alternate was a multiple runway airport with Cat 3 approaches and many airports nearby, perhaps you would be comfortable planning to have closer to that final reserve number upon arriving at your alternate.
The FMGC has some great tools to assist you with fuel planning and bingo fuel calculations. The FMGC uses the term last exit in place of what we have learned as bingo fuel. Let's take a look at applying the BAR concept and incorporating the FMGC into this discussion. Before we do so, though, it's important to remember that the FCOM limitation section says that FMC fuel and time predictions are advisory only. All right, let's take a look at receiving holding instructions en route and calculating bingo fuel. In this example, we are approaching Valerie, and we are issued a clearance to hold north at 12,000 feet. We insert the hold into the FMGC, and now we will determine bingo fuel at the hold, or as the FMGC calls it, last exit fuel. When given a hold, it's a great idea for both crew members to individually calculate a bingo fuel amount and then compare the results. That way, you can avoid confirmation bias errors. Let's use our BAR technique to determine bingo fuel and work our way backwards. So, reserve. What is the minimum amount of fuel we would like to arrive at our alternate of Newark with in case we cannot get into LaGuardia? Well, dispatch has calculated that 4,000 pounds meets the 45-minute fuel requirement. Current weather in Newark is 2 statute miles and snow and congested airspace. Given that the domestic final reserve is calculated at a high altitude, I'd like to plan to arrive at Newark with no less than 5,000 pounds for today's flight. Alternate fuel. The OFP shows that we need 1,400 pounds to get from LaGuardia to Newark, and it looks like the FMGC has calculated only 400 pounds to get from LaGuardia to Newark, our destination to the alternate.
For today's flight, the alternate fuel burn that dispatch has calculated is higher than the FMGC's alternate fuel calculations, but this is not always the case. As you can see here with this flight to Cape Haitian, the FMGC and dispatch's fuel calculations are the same. There are even times where the FMGC may calculate a higher burn than dispatch. Carefully analyze the FMGC and dispatch's calculations and choose the safest option to use.
You can see that we have inputted the routing to the alternate and even added an approach into Newark. We will dive deeper into this huge discrepancy of FMGC alternate fuel calculations versus the OFP alternate fuel calculations. Finally, burn. How much fuel will we burn from Valerie to our destination, LaGuardia? If you look at the OFP navigation fuel log, you can see that dispatch expects us to have 12,200 pounds at Valerie and 11,800 pounds at LaGuardia. Therefore, dispatch calculates our burn to be 400 pounds to get from Valerie to the destination. We can also cross-check this with the FMGC. You can see that the FMGC expects us to have 12,300 pounds at Valerie and arrive at LaGuardia with 11,700 pounds. The difference between the two is 600 pounds for your burn from Valerie to your destination. Let's use the FMGC's calculation of 600 pounds because it is more conservative than dispatch's calculation. If we add these three numbers up, the B plus the A plus the R, we have calculated bingo fuel for our hold at Valerie. It comes up to 7,000 pounds. 7,000 pounds represents the minimum fuel needed to leave Valerie, proceed to LaGuardia, and still be able to go to Newark and land there with a reserve in the event that we cannot get into LaGuardia. Currently, the FMGC is predicting that we will have 12,300 pounds when we arrive at our hold at Valerie. If our bingo fuel is 7,000, we know that we have 5,300 pounds of extra fuel to hold with before reaching that bingo fuel number of 7,000 pounds. Now, the FMGC will calculate bingo fuel for you, but as we said, it calls it last exit fuel. And the FMGC uses the same BAR method to calculate bingo fuel. Let's dive a little deeper into the FMGC's fuel predict page and last exit fuel calculations on the hold page. The fuel predict page has a lot of numbers on it, and it can be intimidating at first glance. It's actually just a simple adding machine. Alternate fuel. Alternate fuel represents the fuel and time required to fly from our primary destination to the designated alternate. Final represents the final reserve you want to land with at your alternate. Minimum destination is simply alternate and final added together. This plus this equals this. Min destination fuel represents the amount of fuel you want to arrive at your destination with, LaGuardia in this case, because it will ensure you will arrive at your destination with the ability to still make it to the alternate and land at the alternate with a final reserve. Let's take this one step further. Estimated fuel on board at your destination minus the minimum destination fuel on board equals extra. So, this plus this equals this. This minus that equals extra. It's a simple adding machine. Extra fuel represents how much fuel we have to hold with or deviate around thunderstorms or try multiple approaches, etc. Minimum destination fuel can also be viewed as bingo fuel at your destination. Now that we understand how min destination fuel is derived, simply this plus this, we can think of min destination fuel as bingo fuel at the destination. If we arrive at a destination and we're flying approach after approach trying to land, at what point do we stop flying the approaches and head to your alternate? Of course, there's many variables here, but simply put, alternate fuel plus final fuel is the minimum amount of fuel needed to leave the destination and fly to your alternate and land with a final reserve. Min destination fuel on board is also a trigger for when the EFOB on your flight plan page turns amber and you receive a scratch pad message that says destination estimated fuel on board is below min if it's been in that situation for longer than 2 minutes. It's important that we interpret this message correctly. This means that when we get to our destination, the McDo is predicting that we will not have enough fuel to still get to our alternate and land with our final reserve. One last time on the fuel predict page. This plus this equals this. That minus that equals that. Okay, let's move on to bingo fuel in the hold, or as the McDo calls it, last exit. As you can see, we've inserted the hold into the flight plan page, and if you select the hold and select the hold again, we see the last exit calculation from the FMGC. Last exit fuel is simply bingo fuel, and the McDo has calculated that last exit amount using the BAR method that we've been discussing. B, the burn from Valerie to the destination, 600 pounds. A, it's taken the alternate calculation from the fuel predict page, 400 pounds. And R, it's taking the final reserve from the fuel predict page for the R. 600 plus 0.4 plus 3,900 equals 4.9. You can see that the bingo fuel amount that the FMGC has calculated is different than the amount that we calculated. This is because we are using different values for alternate fuel and reserve fuel. So, can we adjust these numbers? And how do we ensure that we are using the most accurate numbers possible? Before we adjust these numbers, let's discuss how the FMGC calculates alternate fuel. The FMGC uses 3 different altitudes to calculate alternate fuel. 10,000, flight level 220, and flight level 310, depending on how far away the alternate is. You can see which altitude the FMGC has chosen by selecting the descent wind page, and under alternate, you can see that the FMGC is using 10,000 to get from LaGuardia to Newark for our flight today. So the big question is, can we adjust these numbers on the FMGC? This has been a controversial topic at Spirit Airlines. However, let's take a look at what our manuals have to say about it. The Honeywell guide says that pilot entry of fuel is permitted in the alternate section of the fuel predict page. And the FCOM, under systems related procedures for the FMS, says that the flight crew may enter alternate fuel values planned from the CFP, or the OFP for us, if necessary. One technique is to input a more conservative number, usually the one from the OFP, in the alternate field. But the downside to this is that you are not allowing the McDo to change its fuel predictions if conditions drastically changed, or if you happen to add routing later to your alternate flight plan. However, the upside is that by changing the alternate fuel to the more conservative number, your minimum destination, your extra, and your last exit will be more accurate. In our case, I will put 1.4 as the alternate because of the significant difference between the FMGC's calculation and dispatch's calculation. Okay, final. Once again, this represents the final reserve amount. The Honeywell guide says that this data can be changed by the pilot, and the FCOM says to set or check it during DIFSRIP, and under the systems related procedures, it says that the flight crew may modify these. For this scenario, due to the congested airspace, the low visibility, and the snow, I'm not comfortable planning to land at Newark with only 4,000 pounds. So I will modify this to my comfort level of 5,000 pounds to land at my alternate with. We can now see that alternate fuel plus final fuel equals min destination. This plus this equals this. Additionally, our estimated fuel on board minus the min destination equals extra. Let's check to see what the FMGC has calculated for last exit now that we have modified the alternate and the final. 7,000 pounds, exactly the same as the amount that we calculated on paper. As you can see, the FMGC uses the BAR method to calculate last exit fuel. But beware that this number is only accurate if the alternate and the final reserve in the fuel predict page are also accurate. Of course, if we are anticipating holding, we should always consult with dispatch. Make sure you properly interpret dispatch's communication and the data that they send you. Sometimes, dispatch will send you a revised fuel burn that takes you directly from the hold fix straight to the alternate. This does not represent going from the holding fix to the destination and then the alternate. Clear communication with dispatch is always imperative. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation on Bingo Fuel. Please remember that the intent of this video is not to cover all fuel policies and regulations. The intent of this video is to simply improve our understanding of techniques used to calculate bingo fuel and increase our understanding of the information provided by the FMGC. Stay safe out there.